Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today's video, as you already know by the title and the thumbnail, it is about self-help books and my journey with self-help, what I have learned from self-help, and some of my favorite self-help books. Before we get into that though, I would ask that you subscribe to my channel if you are not subscribed. I do book versus movie content, I do book collection videos. Those two are my main thing. So like just the other day, I did a Phantom of the Opera book and compared it to the 2004 musical as well as the silent film with Lon Chaney, so I compared all three together. And my book versus movie episodes are also available as a podcast, so you can watch it as a YouTube video or listen to the podcast. And then, yeah, I have this awesome book collection I am so proud of, and so I do a lot of videos about that. And then I also do random bookish related videos such as this one right here. And then every now and then I do like a movie video, like I did a Nicolas Cage movie marathon in April. Those ones, they take a lot of time, and so those aren't as often. But anyway, if any of that interests you, then subscribe, hit the bell so you can be notified. I also do different polls on my YouTube community page so that you guys can take part in choosing my content. So yeah, subscribe. And as you're watching this video, if you feel like you were getting something out of it, don't forget to give it a like, a thumbs up, and comment down below and share it with people and just all those things. But moving on to what this video is actually about. So I recently finished How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which I read for the first time. And that book was published in like the 1930s, the early 1930s, I think. So, and Dale Carnegie has other books as well. And so he is like the OG when it comes to self-help. Like, not really, because obviously there were philosophers, back in the day, but as far as more modern times. And I loved his book. And then just the other week, I finished Better Than Happy, which is written by a life coach named Jody Moore, and she has a podcast that I've been listening to off and on for the last couple of years, and I love her podcast, and I loved her book, and it made me want to do a video about self-help. But before I get into like what I've learned from self-help, I wanted to talk about my journey with it, because when I was younger, and when I was a young adult, I did not buy into self-help, like, the positive thinking and, manifestation and all that stuff. It just was like fluff and nonsense, and I didn't believe it, and it was like too simple, right? And I also thought like having more of a fixed mindset, because there's a fixed mindset which believes people can't change and this is the way it is and there's nothing you can do about it, versus a growth mindset where you're capable of change and other people are capable of change, and it helps you be more open to criticism and whatever, because you don't take it so personal, because you're like, okay, I can change that part of myself. But anyway, I had more of a fixed mindset where I was like, there's the haves and the have-nots, and we all have our different lot in life, and it's all almost like thinking it was all predetermined and there's nothing that I can do about it. And so I just didn't really try very hard to change things in my life. And it's not like I was a negative person, but I definitely didn't buy into all of what the self-help culture claimed. And I also was kind of prideful, thinking that I didn't need self-help and I was too good for that. The people who needed self-help were people who weren't intuitive enough, or maybe not empathetic enough, because when you're empathetic, you put yourself in another person's shoes and see where they're coming from. And so I was like, people who need self-help to learn those things, they have their own issues, and I'm not like that, so I don't need self-help. So I had a very prideful attitude about it. And I did read a lot of books and movies, like fiction books and movies. And so I was like, I would rather learn my lessons when it's given in like a nuanced story rather than when it's told to me straightforwardly the way it is in a self-help book. Which, by the way, there's tons of fiction books that have lessons to be learned and tools to apply to your own life that can be very beneficial. I have a video about Anne of Green Gables and different things that are taught in Anne of Green Gables that I really love, that you can also learn from a self-help book, but it's there in a novel. But yeah, so I definitely had a stigma though against self-help, kind of the way people have stigmas against therapy. I don't think I had a stigma against therapy, but that's because I never had the opportunity to go to therapy at that time. So I was never presented with it. Whereas self-help, obviously, anyone can read a self-help book. But I do like that these days, self-help and therapy is more widely talked about and accepted, and there's less of a stigma with it. Like, it's gotten to the point where when I meet people that do have a stigma against therapy, I'm surprised because in our day and age, it seems like it's so open and we know that it's a good thing. So I'm surprised when there's still people that are like, oh, I don't need therapy. Because honestly, like every single person in the world can benefit from therapy. Like, yeah, there's people who need it more than others, but. And I wanted to give a shout out to Noelle Gallagher, who is a very popular booktuber. But I love that she's very open about going to therapy. So I love that she is talking about that. I too have been to therapy. I've been to support groups. I read self-help books, and doing those things is not a weakness. It's like a sign of your own strength. Knowing, like being willing to do those things is a strength because you're willing to change and to grow and to better yourself. So let's get rid of the stigmas against self-help and therapy. But the reason I started reading self-help books at all was when I got married, because my husband reads self-help books. And so through him, there were some that he really liked. And so I ended up reading them myself. And then he actually is also the one that introduced me to the Jody Moore podcast, because someone sent him an episode and then he sent it to me. And then I just really dove into her podcast and I loved it. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about some of the self-help books that I personally have learned the most from, because there are some self-help books where the author is so salesy about it. You know, a lot of self-help too, they're saying the same thing. It's just worded differently. But there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because things hit us differently. And so maybe we'll read one book that just we get nothing from. But then someone else writes a book saying basically the same thing, but in their own way. And then that book is the one that like gets to somebody. So I think it's good to have the variety, even though they're all saying the same thing a lot of the time. But there's also ones that are kind of more out there, which I'm not going to call any out in particular, because if you've benefited from them, then that's great. But there's a Friends episode where Rachel, Monica, and Phoebe read a book called Be Your Own Windkeeper, and it's about how women need to be empowered and how men are the lightning bearers. And so books like that, where it's just a bit too gimmicky, I guess, right? So the books I'm listing are ones that I didn't think were gimmicky and that have helped me and that I feel like I learned a lot from. And I also like the ones that get into the science as well and learning how these actions are literally changing your brain. So I really like ones like that. And, you know, self-help books, they're not always groundbreaking information. Like for some people, it might be groundbreaking, but even if it's just like a good reminder, you know, it's still beneficial to be reminded of these things, you know? But anyway, so some self-help books that I have liked: How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and then Better Than Happy by Jody Moore, which this one she's religious, and so she's Christian. And so if you are not a Christian and you don't like hearing those allegories and things, then you should probably skip this one. But, you know, I love Jody Moore. I think she's awesome. So if you don't mind the Christian aspect, or if you yourself are a Christian, then this could be a great one for you. Storyworthy by Matthew Dicks I'm adding here because even though it's not self-help, it's about how to be a good storyteller, there's still things in there that can help you live a more fulfilling life, if that makes sense. And it was also just really interesting. I don't know if it's worked for me. I don't know if I've applied everything I learned in that book to become a better storyteller, but I did enjoy reading it. And then How to Have Impossible Conversations. This one is similar to the second half of How to Win Friends and Influence People. So the first part is how to win friends. The second part is how to influence people. That section and How to Have Impossible Conversations are pretty similar, but I would recommend both. Change Anything is a great one about breaking habits and starting new habits that goes into the science behind it and gives you lots of tools. So that was a fantastic one. And then also Brene Brown. I haven't read any of her books, but I've watched her videos and listened to her podcast, and she's amazing. And then you have Tim Ferriss, who also has a podcast and has written books, and he has helped a lot of people. You have Anthony Robbins, which I personally have never read anything by Anthony Robbins, but again, I've seen some of his videos. And my husband has read a lot of Anthony Robbins. There is him as well that has helped a lot of people. And I guess that's it as far as the books I would recommend. So to get into just what I've learned from these books, I'm not going to say which one I learned what from, so it's just kind of jumbled. So sorry if this video isn't the most organized, but maybe I'll do a follow-up video at some point if this one does well and if people want to see more about self-help. And maybe I'll arrange it more specifically like actual book reviews for these specific books and what they teach and what I learned from it. But this is just a hodgepodge of what I've learned just from self-help books and podcasts in general. Starting with the fact that positive thinking, it isn't just like, thinking positive thoughts, like I thought before, where it's just like a bunch of fluff and what is that doing? It actually is doing something. Your brain is literally being rewired and is physically changing when you change your thoughts. And it comes back to like being happy and accepting who you are now and being happy with your life right now. Because if you're not, then you never will be. Because you might think like, I'll be happy when I achieve this income level. But guess what? Because you have trained your brain to find things to complain about and to find evidence why you shouldn't be happy, when you achieve that income level, your brain is going to keep being like, well, we need to find something else to complain about. Like, what's something else that's not good enough? So you're training your brain to find things that aren't good enough. And so if you train your brain right now to be happy and satisfied and realize you do have enough, then you are training your brain to be satisfied and be happy. And if you think like, oh, I'll be happy once I achieve this thing, no, you won't. Same with your body. People are like, when I lose this amount of weight, then I'll be happy. No, you won't, because you're training your brain to not be happy with your body. So even if you do hit that weight mark, your brain will look for something else about your body that is not good enough. And then I've never read The Secret, but the whole like manifestation thing where like you find what you look for, I definitely believe in that. I believe you also need to put in the work, of course, as well. You can't just like sit around like imagining what you want your life to be like and wait for it to happen. You need to put in the work. But I really do love how like you find what you're looking for, right? And so if you tell yourself, I don't have enough and life is hard, then guess what? You are telling your brain, okay, now find evidence that life is hard and that I don't have enough. And guess what? You will find the evidence. And then you'll be like, see, I knew life was hard and I knew I didn't have enough. Whereas if you believe like that I have plenty and that I have a lot to be grateful for, then guess what? Your brain is going to look for evidence to prove that you have a lot to be grateful for. So there's a phrase where it's like, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. Because whatever you believe, your brain will find evidence for it. Like if you think people are just selfish and mean, then you're going to find evidence to prove that. And you will be like, see, I told you so. Whereas if you believe, everybody is just trying their best and sometimes they're struggling, but they're trying their best, then guess what? Your brain will find evidence to prove that people are trying their best. And then I love the phrase, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And this one I heard in a support group actually, and I thought it applied to the other person because I was like, yeah, exactly. They're not changing, so nothing is changing. They need to change. But really, the phrase applies to yourself. Because, for example, this works in a lot of different ways, but I'll use it in relation to relationships. So if you have a relationship with someone and you don't like the dynamic that's going on, and you think it's their fault because it's like, they're too selfish, or they lie all the time, or maybe they have an addiction and this addiction is ruining the relationship, then it seems so obvious that they are the ones that need to change if this relationship is going to improve. But guess what? You can be the change though, because you play a part in this relationship too. It's a two-way street, right? And when you change something about yourself in relation to that relationship, the dynamic will change, hopefully for the better, right? Even if it's not something directly with them, like if you complain a lot about this person to other people, but if you decide to change that aspect where you're like, I'll treat them the same, but I'm going to stop complaining to them when I talk to other people. Changing that will change the dynamic of your relationship with that person, even though maybe that person didn't change anything at all. It was you who changed, but that changed the dynamic. Anyway, I hope that made sense. This also works for your life too. Like if you're not satisfied with your life, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So change something in your daily routine, and that will lead to other changes that you are wanting to see. And another one with relationships is how so often we have manuals for people, like, these molds we think they should fit in. And how often do we say the phrase where it's like, I don't get it, because if I were him, I would have done this. Or if I were her, I would have reacted this way. We do that all the time. But guess what? Like those people aren't us. So why are we saying, if I were them, I would be doing this? It's like, well, they're not you. So stop trying to fit them into this mold of what you think they should be. And also just accept people for who they are, because people are going to be themselves, whether you accept it or not. And by not accepting it and trying to fit them into something that they don't want to, you're just causing more suffering for yourself. And this was one that Jody Moore talked about in a podcast episode where a lady was like, well, I guess I have to let go of the dream I have of what my mother could be. And Jody Moore was like, yeah, let go of it and stop calling it a dream, because that makes it seem like it's something good. When trying to control someone and make them be the way you want them to be, that's not a good thing. So stop trying to act like it's a good thing and calling it a dream of what you wish they would be. And speaking of acceptance, also, lack of acceptance is what leads to suffering. when we are like so resistant to what is happening. And obviously, as I'm saying all of this, if you're in an abusive relationship or something, that's a totally different scenario. So all of these apply to just regular life relationships. But anyway, when something is happening in your life and you are not accepting it, if you get fired, or if you have gained weight and you're unhappy about it, or if there's something going on in a relationship and you don't like what's happening in your relationship and you're not accepting it, you're just causing more suffering for yourself. The sooner you can just accept it, the sooner you can move forward. And by accepting it, you can potentially change it, right? Which you would think like, well, if I accept it, that means I'm okay with what's going on. But no, you can accept it, and by accepting it is how you cause change to happen, if that makes sense. But yeah, lack of acceptance leads to suffering ultimately. And then another one, I want to share a quote by Mark Twain, which reads, "I am an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." And I love this one because how much time do we spend worrying about things that haven't even happened and that maybe won't happen at all? But we have so much evidence to prove that like it will happen or it could happen. And we have so much evidence. So we need to start worrying about it because clearly it's going to happen. But then so often it doesn't even happen. And we've just wasted all that time worrying about it, stressing ourselves out when it didn't even happen. And I get, yeah, sometimes there is so much evidence to show that it will happen. And so you're like, well, I need to prepare and I need to worry and I need to stress. But then it like just because you have evidence to support that it will happen doesn't mean that it will happen because you don't know. So we just spend so much time stressing about things when they aren't even happening right now. And then I wanted to talk about shame and pride, which Brene Brown focuses a lot on shame. And so I just love the videos she has and the podcast she has. But something I find really interesting is that when you're in shame or pride, both of those push people away and weaken your relationships. Because when you're in pride mode, one, you think you're better than other people and you want to prove that you're better than other people, and who wants to be around a person like that? Then when you're in shame, you feel like you're not good enough. So again, you're comparing yourself to other people, but you feel like you're not enough, and seeing other people is a reminder of how you're not enough and you have something to be ashamed about. And so you draw yourself in when you're in shame or guilt. And so both of those push people away. Whereas when you are healthy and confident, that strengthens relationships, because when you're confident, you embrace all of yourself, even your flaws. And you're like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but I love myself and I love my strengths and I love my flaws and I love all of it because it's who I am. And it also, when you have that confidence in yourself, it spreads to other people and you accept them for who they are, flaws and all. And when you have that confidence in other people and yourself, and you accept that we're all humans who make a lot of mistakes and aren't perfect, and we do things that hurt each other unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, but accepting that that is part of the human experience just helps you have such a better time on this earth, and not having these false expectations of people to be something that they're not. And not having false expectations for yourself, and allowing yourself to be who you are. And again, when you accept yourself and your flaws, that can help lead to a better change. Which again, it seems like it wouldn't, right? Because if you're accepting your flaws, that means you're okay with it and it's not going to change. But that's not true. Acceptance is the first key to change. But it's tough because you have to truly accept and love yourself. You can't you can fake it till you make it, I guess, but you have to truly feel it for it to, work its magic, kind of a thing. And then also letting yourself feel negative emotions. Like, don't wallow in it, but just sit with it and allow yourself to feel it and allow other people to feel it, which I forgot to mention the book, I Don't Have to Make Everything All Better, which is about exactly what the title says, how if someone is feeling a negative emotion and they voice it to you, just validate them and be like, wow, that sucks. Don't try to convince them they're wrong and don't try to fix it with a solution. Just validate them. And that can be so important. And yeah, don't try to change someone's mood, especially if they're not ready, because sometimes you need to feel that negative emotion and work through it, rather than being like, negative emotion, I gotta stuff this down, I gotta not feel it, I gotta do something so that this isn't happening right now. And that's what leads to addiction, right? When you're feeling a negative emotion and you don't know how to sit with it, so then you turn to a substance to get rid of that negative emotion. And then speaking of, addiction and habits and breaking habits, it goes back to loving yourself and having compassion for yourself, even your flaws. And when you do mess up, like if you have a habit to work out every day, and you have a day where you don't work out, instead of beating yourself up, being like, I just can't do anything, I can't commit, I'm so lazy, I didn't even work out this morning. Instead, turn bad days into good data and think okay, why didn't I work out today? And figure out what the reasons were, And then you can use that to learn and improve and stick with your goal going forward. And then another thing with this is if you're trying to resist something and your goal is to break a habit, when you're in those early stages, you should just avoid being around whatever thing you're trying to stop doing. Some people might think like, well, to show that I'm serious about not doing this thing, I should confront it and be in a room with it and prove that I won't give in. It's like, yeah, you could do that down the road, but especially early on, like, no, don't tempt yourself if you're not strong enough. Like, avoid being around it, and that's fine. That's not a weakness because, it kind of is a weakness, I guess, because you're not strong enough to stand up against it, but it's a strength to acknowledge that it's a weakness and that you need to be away from it for however long and not put yourself in a situation where you face it and are faced with temptation. But yeah, so those are some things that help with habit building or habit breaking. But yeah, I guess that's actually about it in my notes as far as what I've learned from self-help. Again, this was just a small taste of just some things that came to mind first. Another one, which I forgot to mention, is not criticizing people. Like instead, compliment the positive things they do rather than being critical of the things they do that you don't like. Instead, compliment the positive, and that will help them to be like, oh, this is what gets compliments, so I'll do this more and not do this other thing. And so ultimately, what it all comes down to is having compassion for yourself and for others, loving yourself, even though you're not perfect, because guess what? Nobody is. We all make mistakes. So just loving yourself regardless of that, and loving other people regardless of that as well. And instead of judging someone because they do something that you don't like, see them as a human who is struggling in this life, trying their best. And instead of getting annoyed at them, like put yourself in their shoes and be like, wow, I wonder why they felt the need to do that. There must be something going on in their life that caused them to do that thing. So those are just some of my thoughts when it comes to self-help. Let me know what some self-help books you like are down below in the comments. And again, if people like this video, then I can do a follow-up one again. And maybe I'll read some other self-help books in preparation for it or reread some of these because some of them are ones that I read like a few years ago now. I could definitely benefit from a reread. But yeah, thanks for watching. Once again, don't forget to subscribe and to like this video. And I will see you next time. Bye.